I understand you want a new story, and I apologize if my previous response caused confusion. It seems I misinterpreted your request as asking if the Alara story was what you wanted continued or if you wanted something new. Let us discard the Alara storyline completely and start fresh with a brand new story based on the original vignettes File 1, the detailed analysis File 2, and the idea and outline for a new story. File 3, focusing on the what-if scenario involving the spit boy whom we called Pip, who has an intuitive understanding of metal tempering, set against a castle siege. I will ensure this new story is developed to the 100,000 character target and adheres to all your formatting and content requirements, focusing on the country of the original story, which I will continue to interpret as a generic medieval European/English style setting as depicted in the vignettes. Let us begin this new narrative. The heat was a living thing, a malicious god that dwelled in the heart of Blackwood Keep's great kitchen hearth. It licked at Pip's skin, seared his lungs with every breath, and painted the world in shimmering, distorted waves. He was barely 10, small for his age, a bundle of soot-stained rags and protruding bones, and his entire existence revolved around the slow, monotonous turning of the spit. Today, a fat capon sizzled and spat, its aroma, once enticing, now just another layer in the symphony of kitchen stenches that clung to him like a second skin, burnt fat, sour wine, stale sweat, and the ever-present metallic tang of the iron spit itself. Was it a blessing or a curse, this constant inferno? In the depths of winter, the other scullery boys and turnspit dogs would huddle near, envying his enforced proximity to the flames. But they did not understand. They did not feel the way the heat burrowed into your marrow, one side of you roasting while the other froze in the drafty kitchen. They did not know the intimate, hateful language of a blister bursting on your palm, the acrid smell of your own singed hair. Pip turned the crank. Clockwise. Slow and steady. Too fast, and Cook Agnes, a woman whose temper was as fiery as her ovens, would fetch him a clout with her heaviest ladle. Too slow, and the meat would char on one side, raw on the other, earning him not just a clout but likely no supper either. He would learn. Oh, he would learn. His small hands, though calloused, were a roadmap of minor burns, old and new. His eyebrows, once thick, were now perpetually sparse, refusing to grow back fully after a particularly violent flare. Up from a grease-laden log. He did not just feel the heat, he saw it. He saw the way the iron spit glowed dull red in its core after hours of turning, how the cheaper iron hooks used for hanging pots would sag and warp if left too close for too long. While the old, heavy cauldron, patched and repatched, seemed to drink the fire and ask for more. He would see Master Thomas, the castle blacksmith, thrusting metal into the forge. Hissing and spitting, then hammering it into submission on the anvil. He would watch, mesmerized, as the metal changed color, from angry red to cherry, then to a softer orange, sometimes even a pale yellow before it was plunged into the quenching trough. He did not know the words for it, the smith's jargon, but he knew the colors. He knew the feel of metal that had been treated right, and the brittle look of metal that had been rushed or mistreated. He would once found a discarded dagger near the refuse heap, its tip snapped clean off. He would held it, felt the wrongness in the grain of the break, a crystalline shimmer that spoke of a temper gone awry. "Boy, are you dreaming or turning that bird?" Cook Agnes's voice shattered his reverie. He flinched, his hand instinctively tightening on the crank. "Turning, cook," he mumbled, his gaze fixed on the capon. The kitchen was its usual chaos. Scullions scurried with buckets of water and slops. Pot boys wrestled with heavy cauldrons, and the air thrummed with shouted orders, clanging metal, and the sizzle of cooking. Pip was the still point in this turning world. A small, forgotten cog, essential yet invisible. He existed to ensure the perfect rotation, the even cooking, for meals he would only ever smell, or, if fortune smiled, taste a discarded, gristle-laden bone from. Today, however, an unusual tension prickled the air, sharper than the usual kitchen stress. Messengers had been arriving at the keep all morning, their horses lathered, their faces grim. Lord Beaumont, Blackwood's master, had been closeted with his captain-at-arms, Sir Callan, for hours. Whispers, like scurrying rats, darted through the servants' passages, talk of bandits, no, not bandits, but armed men, a rival baron, Lord Valerius, who had long coveted Blackwood's fertile lands and strategic river access. Pip, hunched by his fire, heard snippets. Valerius's colors seen in the Emberwood. 300 strong, they say, with siege engines. The south wall is weak, always has been. Fear, cold and unfamiliar, began to seep through the oppressive heat of the hearth. Sieges were things from stories, from the minstrel's songs, grand, terrible events that happened to other people, in other castles. Not here, not to Blackwood. But the tension was undeniable. Even cook Agnes was less inclined to shout, her usual bluster replaced by a tight-lipped anxiety. She slammed a new joint of venison onto a larger spit, grunting at Pip to find another boy to help turn it. And see it is done proper, boy. If these are to be our last decent meals, they will not be ruined by your mooning. The day wore on, each rotation of the spit feeling heavier, more ominous. The usual clatter of the castle seemed muted, replaced by the tramp of guards' boots, the creak of the portcullis being tested, the distant, rhythmic clang from the forge as Master Thomas and his apprentices worked with a desperate urgency. Forging what? Arrowheads, repairing armor. Pip watched the flames dance, his small face smudged with soot, his eyes reflecting the firelight. He thought of the colors of heated metal, he thought of the broken dagger. And a strange, unformed premonition, as hot and unsettling as the hearth itself, began to stir within him. The premonition solidified into grim reality by nightfall. From the narrow, soot-stained window of the upper kitchen storage room where Pip and a few other lowly boys slept on straw pallets, they could see them, the distant, malevolent glow of campfires, like a necklace of dying stars, ringing Blackwood Keep. Lord Valerius had arrived. The siege had begun. The castle transformed. The usual rhythms of feasting and leisure were replaced by a frantic, martial energy. Men at arms clattered through the courtyards, their faces grim. The great hall became a makeshift barracks and armory. Food was rationed, the kitchens now tasked with producing sustenance for a garrison rather than delicacies for the high table. Cook Agnes, her face a mask of strained determination, barked orders with a new, clipped urgency. Pip's world, however, remained largely unchanged in its core function. Meat still needed to be roasted, though now it was stringy, hastily butchered mutton and tough, sinewy beef for the soldiers, not fat capons for the lord's table. The spit still turned. The heat was still his constant, oppressive companion, but the fear was new. It was a cold knot in his belly that even the hearth fires could not melt. He heard the sounds of the siege, the distant, ominous thud of Valerius's trebuchets, the answering crack of Blackwood's own smaller siege engines, the shouts of men. The occasional scream. The air grew thick with the smell of fear, and something else, the acrid, metallic scent of serious, desperate work from Master Thomas's forge, which now seemed to burn day and night. One morning, a few days into the siege, Pip was sent to the forge with a broken iron trivet. It was a small errand, a brief respite from the suffocating heat of the kitchen hearth. The forge was a scene of controlled chaos. Master Thomas, his massive arms black with soot, his face grim, hammered relentlessly at a glowing piece of iron. Sparks flew like angry fireflies. His two apprentices, older boys named Will and Hal, pumped the bellows and ran errands, their faces strained. Pip, waiting for Master Thomas to acknowledge him, watched, fascinated as always. The smith was working on a section of what looked like a mangonel arm, trying to reinforce a cracked joint. He heated the metal, his experienced eye judging the color, the texture. He spoke to it in grunts and curses, as if it were a recalcitrant beast. "Needs more heat, Hal, you sluggard, and a clean quench this time, none of your muddy water," Master Thomas roared, not looking up. He brought the glowing metal to the anvil, his hammer ringing out a desperate rhythm. Pip saw it then. A faint, almost invisible tracery of lines within the metal near the crack, like tiny, frozen lightning bolts. He would seen something similar once on a spit that had snapped under. The weight of a whole bore. It was metal that had been heated too quickly, cooled too fast, making it brittle, treacherous. This reinforcement, Pip knew with a certainty that went deeper than words, would not hold. It would shatter under the first real strain. He opened his mouth to say something, then closed it. Who was he, a spit boy? A greasy, soot-stained urchin? What did he know of a master smith's craft? Master Thomas would likely cuff him for his impertinence, or worse. He delivered the broken trivet and scurried back to the kitchens, the image of the flawed metal burning in his mind. The thuds of the enemy trebuchets seemed louder that day. Closer. He heard that Blackwood's largest mangonel, the stone slinger, had been damaged. Were they trying to repair it with that faulty piece? The kitchen was a hive of activity, but the usual boisterousness was gone. Cook Agnes was doling out meager rations of pottage, her face etched with worry. A rumor had spread that the south wall, the weakest point of the keep's defenses, was beginning to crumble under the relentless bombardment. Pip returned to his spit, turning a stringy piece of mutton. The heat felt different today, less an enemy, more a familiar, terrible truth. He watched the flames. Saw the colors shift and change, the deep cherry red, the bright orange, the almost white-hot heart of the fire. He thought of the mangonel arm, of the treacherous lines within the iron. Later that day, a runner, his face pale and streaked with dust, burst into the kitchen, gasping for water. The stone slinger. The arm shattered, he choked out. Master Thomas. He has been injured. A shard of iron. A cold dread gripped Pip. He had known. He had seen the flaw, and he had said nothing. Cook Agnes made the sign of the cross. "Saints preserve us," she whispered. The other kitchen staff exchanged frightened glances. The stone slinger was their best defense against Valerius's larger engines. Without it, Pip felt a weight of guilt so heavy it almost buckled his knees. The heat of the hearth suddenly felt unbearable, suffocating. He had seen, and he had been silent. And now, Master Thomas was hurt, and Blackwood's defenses were weakened, all because a little spit boy had been too afraid to speak. The taste of soot and self-reproach was bitter in his mouth. The sizzle of the mutton on the spit seemed to mock him. Master Thomas's injury cast a pall over the keep. He had not been killed, but the shard of iron had gashed his arm badly, and the rough barber surgeon who tended him spoke grimly of infection and the possible loss of the limb. Without its master, the forge fell into a state of confused inefficiency. Will and Hal, his apprentices, were willing enough, but they lacked Thomas's decades of experience, his intuitive feel for the metal. They tried to repair tools, to forge new arrowheads, but their work was slow, often clumsy. The siege tightened its grip. Valerius's trebuchets pounded relentlessly at the south wall, great chunks of stone crumbling with each impact. The defenders, led by the grim-faced Sir Callan, fought back with a desperate courage, but their resources were dwindling. Arrows were running low. Their remaining siege engines were small, inaccurate, and prone to breakdown. Pip continued his work at the hearth, his guilt a constant, gnawing companion. He saw the flawed repairs coming from the forge, a hastily mended spearhead that looked likely to snap, A new hinge for a shield that was visibly uneven. He knew, with his strange, fire-taught certainty, that these things would fail when they were needed most. But still. He said nothing. Fear was a powerful silencer. One afternoon, Sir Callan himself strode into the forge, his armor dented, his face black with smoke and fury. "The portcullis winch," he roared at Will and Hal, who cowered before his anger. "The main ratchet tooth has sheared off, we can barely raise the inner gate, can you fashion a new one, quickly?" Will, the older apprentice, stammered, "Sir Callan, a ratchet tooth. That is complex work. It needs to be strong, perfectly shaped. Master Thomas, he would know." "But Master Thomas is abed, bleeding and feverish," Sir Callan snarled. "Are you smiths or are you milksops? Blackwood depends on that gate. If Valerius breaches the south wall and we cannot secure the inner bailey." He did not finish the sentence. He did not need to. Pip, who had been sent to the forge on another minor errand, to fetch a poker for the kitchen fires, overheard the exchange. He pictured the ratchet tooth in his mind. A thick, sturdy piece of iron, needing to bear immense strain, its teeth perfectly angled to grip and hold. It would need to be forged from the best iron, heated slowly and evenly, tempered with a precise, careful hand. Too soft, and it would bend. Too brittle, and it would snap. Just like the mangonel arm, just like the first tooth had. He watched as Will and Hal, under Sir Callan's furious gaze, began to work. They selected a piece of iron, too hastily, Pip thought, not checking it for flaws. They thrust it into the forge, pumping the bellows with a frantic energy that produced a roaring, uncontrolled heat. Pip knew, with a sickening certainty, that they would fail. The heat was wrong, too fierce, too uneven. The metal would be stressed, its internal structure compromised. The tooth they forged would be a treacherous thing, likely to shatter under the first real test. He had to say something. The image of the crumbling south wall, of Valerius's men pouring into the keep, of the inner gate failing to close, was a nightmare made real. The fear of speaking was immense, but the fear of what would happen if he did not was, suddenly, overwhelmingly, greater. He took a deep, shaky breath, the acrid air of the forge filling his lungs. He stepped forward, a small, soot-stained figure amidst the towering men and the roaring fire. "Sirs." His voice was a hoarse whisper, barely audible above the clang of the hammer and the hiss of the bellows. Sir Callan whirled around, his eyes blazing. "What is it, boy, can't you see we are busy?" Pip flinched but stood his ground. He pointed a trembling, grimy finger towards the forge. The fire, sir. It is too hot. For that iron. It will make the tooth weak. Brittle." Will and Hal stared at him, open-mouthed. Sir Callan looked down at Pip as if he were a particularly annoying insect. "And what would a spit boy know of a smith's work?" he sneered. "Get back to your cinders, urchin, before I have you whipped for impertinence." Tears of frustration and fear pricked Pip's eyes, but he did not move. I watched the fire, sir. All day. I know the colors. That iron. It is turning too fast. It needs a slower heat. A deeper heat. And when you quench it. It must be done just so, or it will crack from within." He spoke in a rush, the words tumbling out, a jumble of observations and intuitive knowledge he did not know how to explain properly. "Enough of this nonsense," Sir Callan raised his hand as if to strike him. "Wait." A weak voice came from the doorway of the small antechamber where Master Thomas lay on a pallet. The master smith, his face pale and beaded with sweat, his arm heavily bandaged, had pulled himself up, leaning heavily against the doorframe. He looked at Pip, his gaze surprisingly intent. Let the boy speak, Sir Callan. Sir Callan lowered his hand, looking from the master smith to the little spit boy with a mixture of annoyance and grudging respect for Thomas's intervention. The colors, boy, Master Thomas rasped, his voice weak but clear. What colors do you see? Pip looked at the iron in the forge, now glowing an almost painful white yellow at the edges. It is like a summer sun, master. Too bright. It should be like a ripe cherry, or a winter sunset. And when it is ready, it should breathe, not scream. He did not know where the words came from, but they felt true. Master Thomas stared at Pip for a long moment, a strange expression on his face. Then he looked at his apprentices. The boy speaks a curious truth, though he lacks the words of a craftsman. The heat is too fierce for this task. You are rushing, and you will ruin it. Draw it out. Let it cool somewhat. We need strength, not just speed. He sagged against the doorframe. His face contorted with pain. A slower heat, as he says. And a careful temper. Listen to him. For once, listen to the fire itself. Will and Hal looked at each other, then at Pip, their expressions a mixture of disbelief and grudging curiosity. Sir Callan snorted but said nothing, his eyes fixed on the small, soot-covered boy who now stood, trembling slightly, at the heart of Blackwood Keep's desperate defense. The fate of the portcullis, and perhaps of the castle itself, now seemed to rest, however improbably, on the strange, fire-born intuition of a little spit boy. A tense silence fell over the forge, broken only by the crackle of the fire and Master Thomas's labored breathing. Will and Hal, visibly uncertain, looked to Sir Callan, who merely grunted, his gaze still fixed on Pip with a kind of frustrated bewilderment. Well, boy, Will said, a note of challenge in his voice. If you are so wise about the fire, what then, how should it be? Pip swallowed hard, the attention of these grown men, these warriors and craftsmen, a heavy weight. But the image of the flawed metal, the memory of the stone slinger's catastrophic failure, spurred him on. He pointed to the bellows. Less air, for a time. Let the heart of the fire settle. It needs to be deep, not just angry on the surface. He then gestured to the piece of iron. Will was about to work. And that piece. It has the coldness in it. A flaw. There, see, he traced an imaginary line on its surface. Another piece would be better. One that feels whole. He spoke of feel, of colors, of the breath of the fire, terms that made no sense in the formal language of smithcraft, yet they resonated with a primal understanding of the element he had lived with so intimately. Master Thomas, despite his pain, nodded slowly from the doorway. The boy has an eye. A strange eye, but an eye nonetheless. Do as he suggests, Will. Select another bar. And let him guide your heat. Will and Hal exchanged incredulous looks, but the master smith's endorsement, however weak, and Sir Callan's grudging silence, compelled them. They discarded the flawed iron bar and, under Pip's hesitant directions, selected another. What followed was a strange, almost surreal collaboration. Pip, the little spit boy, stood near the forge, his small, soot-stained face intense with concentration. His eyes fixed on the flames and the metal. He did not touch the tools, did not pump the bellows or swing the hammer. But he spoke, in his quiet, halting way, guiding the apprentices. A little more air now, Hal. Yes, like that. See how the color deepens, not just flashes. Now, Will, turn it. Slowly. Let the heat soak through. It should be the color of a good ale in sunshine. Before it takes the hammer. He spoke of the metal as if it were a living thing, with moods and needs. He described the sounds it should make, the way the sparks should fly. He guided them through the heating, the shaping, the repeated firings. Sir Callan watched. His initial skepticism slowly giving way to a reluctant fascination. Even he could see that the metal under Pip's strange tutelage seemed more responsive, more willing than it had under the apprentice's frantic efforts. The forging of the ratchet tooth was slow, painstaking work. Pip insisted on gradual heating, on careful turning, on allowing the metal to rest between hammerings. He described the precise shade of cherry red needed before the final shaping, the exact moment to quench it, not in the muddy water of the slack tub, but in a cleaner bucket of brine he had them prepare, insisting the shock needed to be just so. It must not scream when it meets the water, he whispered. His eyes wide as Will, following his instruction, plunged the glowing tooth into the brine. There was a sharp hiss, a cloud of steam, but not the violent, cracking sound that often accompanied a rushed quench. When the tooth was finally drawn out, cooled, and cleaned, it looked different. There was a uniformity to its color, a subtle resilience in its texture that even Sir Callan, no smith, could sense. It felt solid, trustworthy. "Well, I will be damned," Sir Callan muttered, taking the finished tooth in his gauntlet hand. He examined it closely. "It looks right." He glanced at Pip, new, almost respectful expression in his eyes. "You have a strange gift, boy." Master Thomas, who had watched the entire process with a mixture of pain and profound interest, gave a weak smile. "The fire. It speaks to some. It seems it has chosen to speak to this one." There was no time for further reflection. Sir Callan, clutching the precious ratchet tooth, hurried away to oversee its installation in the portcullis winch. Will and Hal, exhausted but also strangely exhilarated, began to clean the forge, occasionally glancing at Pip with a newfound, if still bewildered, respect. Pip himself felt drained, as if he had poured all his energy into the fire and the metal. He leaned against a cool section of the forge wall, the heat of his own hearth suddenly seeming distant. He had spoken. He had intervened. And, perhaps, he had made a difference. The thought was both terrifying and strangely satisfying. Later that evening, as the sounds of bombardment from Valerius's engines continued their relentless assault, a cheer went up from the direction of the main gatehouse. Word quickly spread, the new ratchet tooth had been installed. It had held. The portcullis was secure. Cook Agnes, when she heard the news, looked at Pip with a strange expression. "So, the little cinder mouse has claws after all," she said, not unkindly. She even pressed an extra piece of bread into his hand at supper time, a gesture of unprecedented generosity. Pip ate his bread, the taste of it mingling with the lingering scent of the forge on his clothes. He was still just a spit boy. He would still have to turn the spits, endure the heat, live on the scraps. But something had changed. He had found his voice, however small, however strange. And in the heart of the besieged Blackwood Keep, amidst the chaos and the fear, a little spit boy had, for a brief, crucial moment, held the fate of the castle in his small, soot-stained hands. The fire had spoken through him, and for once, someone had listened. The successful forging of the ratchet tooth, guided by Pip's uncanny intuition, did not win the siege, but it bought Blackwood Keep precious time. The secure inner portcullis meant that even if the south wall was breached, the defenders could fall back to the inner bailey, a much stronger defensive position. Morale, which had been dangerously low, flickered with a renewed, if fragile, hope. Pip became a minor curiosity. Soldiers, passing through the kitchens, would sometimes glance at him with a mixture of awe and amusement. "That the fire boy," they would mutter. "The one who taught the smiths their trade," Will and Hal, the apprentices, treated him with a grudging respect, occasionally even asking his opinion on the heat of the forge for a particular task. Though they still grumbled about taking instruction from a scullion. Master Thomas, slowly recovering from his wound, would summon Pip to his bedside when he was strong enough. He would ask Pip questions, not about smithcraft in the way he knew it, but about the fire, the colors, the feel of the metal. "You see things, boy," Thomas would rasp, his eyes thoughtful. "Things others miss. It is a rare gift. A dangerous one. Perhaps, if not understood." Pip did not understand it himself. He only knew what the fire told him, what the metal showed him. He still turned the spits, the heat his familiar tormentor, but now there was a subtle shift in his perception. He saw not just flames, but a language. He saw not just roasting meat, but the transformation of matter under extreme duress. The siege wore on. Days blurred into a monotonous cycle of bombardment, skirmishes, and dwindling supplies. The south wall, despite frantic repairs, was indeed breached. Valerius's men poured through the gap, their battle cries echoing through the outer bailey. But the inner portcullis, its new ratchet tooth holding firm, slammed down, trapping the first wave of attackers and allowing Sir Caelan's men to decimate them. Blackwood Keep had held its inner sanctum. But for how long? Food was running desperately low. The well in the inner bailey was barely providing enough water. Disease began to whisper through the crowded, unsanitary conditions. It was during this desperate time that Pip's strange gift was called upon again. Sir Caelan's own sword, a fine piece of tempered steel, had been damaged in the fighting at the breach. Its edge chipped, its point blunted. It was a symbolic blow as much as a practical one. The captain's sword, failing him. "Can anything be done?" Sir Caelan asked Master Thomas, who was now able to sit up, though still too weak to work the forge himself. He held out the damaged blade. Master Thomas examined it, his brow furrowed. "Re-tempering a blade of this quality. It is a delicate art, Sir Caelan. One mistake, and its strength is gone forever. My arm. I cannot trust it for such fine work. And the apprentices." He shook his head. Sir Caelan's gaze fell on Pip, who was hovering nearby, having brought Master Thomas a cup of thin broth. "The boy," Sir Caelan said, a note of reluctant consideration in his voice. "He guided the forging of the ratchet tooth. Could he guide the re-tempering of this blade?" Master Thomas looked at Pip, a long, searching look. "The fire speaks to him, it is true. But a sword is not a ratchet tooth, Sir Caelan. It has a soul, a history. To restore its edge, its temper, without breaking its spirit, that requires more than just an eye for color." He paused. "But perhaps the fire will guide him again." And so, Pip found himself once more at the heart of the forge, this time with Sir Caelan's precious sword entrusted to his guidance. Will and Hal, though still skeptical, were more willing to listen now, the success of the ratchet tooth undeniable. The process was even more painstaking, more fraught with tension, than before. Pip, his small face intense, his eyes seeming to absorb the very essence of the flames, directed every step. He insisted on a charcoal fire of specific woods, on a heat so carefully controlled it seemed to breathe with a life of its own. He spoke of the sword as if it were a wounded warrior, needing to be coaxed back to strength, not forced. He described the subtle shifts in color, the almost imperceptible changes in the metal's texture as it heated, as it cooled. He had them draw out the existing temper, then slowly, meticulously, re-instill it. His instructions a strange poetry of fire and steel. "Now," he whispered, as the sword glowed a perfect, even cherry red in the heart of the forge. "To the oil. Not water this time. Oil, warm just so. It must embrace the steel, not shock it. Under his direction, the glowing blade was plunged into a trough of carefully prepared oil. There was a deep, sighing hiss, a plume of aromatic smoke, but no crack, no telltale ping of stressed metal. When the sword was finally cooled, cleaned, and its edge painstakingly re-honed by Master Thomas offering verbal guidance from his palate, it was a thing of beauty and deadly functionality. Its balance felt perfect, its edge keen enough to shave a hair. Sir Callan took it, his expression unreadable. He tested its flex, its edge. A slow smile spread across his smoke-stained face. "By the gods, boy," he said, looking at Pip with something akin to awe. "You have done it. You have given my sword its heart back." He clapped Pip on the shoulder, a gesture so unexpected it almost sent the boy sprawling. "Blackwood owes you a debt, little fire wisp." The restoration of Sir Callan's sword was another small miracle, another boost to the flagging morale of the besieged keep. But it could not change the grim reality. Valerius was patient. He had time. Blackwood did not. Starvation loomed. Then, one dawn, a new sound drifted over the battlements. Not the thud of trebuchets, but the fanfare of trumpets. Different trumpets. Hope, wild and improbable, surged through the keep. A relief force. It was Lord Beaumont's powerful cousin, the Earl of Northgate, alerted by a desperate messenger who had slipped through Valerius's lines weeks ago, had finally arrived with a formidable army. Valerius, caught between the fresh forces and the stubbornly defended keep, was forced to withdraw, his siege broken. Blackwood Keep was saved. In the chaotic, joyous aftermath, as supplies poured into the grateful keep and the work of rebuilding began, Pip was largely forgotten again. He was, after all, just a spit boy. He returned to his hearth. To his endless turning, the brief, intense moments of his strange authority in the forge already fading like dreams. Sir Callan, busy with his duties, merely nodded at him in passing. Master Thomas, his arm healing, was once again the undisputed master of the forge, though he would sometimes look at Pip with a thoughtful, appraising eye. The world had righted itself. But Pip was not quite the same. The fire had spoken through him, and he had listened. And in the heart of that inferno, he had found something more than just heat and soot. He had found a strange, frightening, and wondrous connection to the very essence of transformation. He was still Pip, the spit boy, but he was also Pip, the fire wisp, the boy who understood the secret language of heat and steel. And that knowledge, like a deeply buried ember, glowed within him, waiting. The end of the siege brought a semblance of normalcy back to Blackwood Keep, though normalcy was a relative term in a castle still bearing the scars of bombardment and the privations of a long blockade. Food was no longer scarce, but the habits of rationing died hard. The south wall was slowly being rebuilt, the sounds of masons' hammers replacing the thud of trebuchets. Pip returned to the relentless monotony of the spit. The capons and joints of venison were fatter now, destined for Lord Beaumont's celebratory feasts rather than the meager sustenance of a besieged garrison. The heat of the hearth was, as always, his constant companion, but the memory of the forge, of the respect, however fleeting, he had commanded, lingered like the aftertaste of smoke. Master Thomas, his arm now largely healed though still stiff, resumed his full duties in the forge. He was a man of few words, but his interactions with Pip held a new quality. Occasionally, when Pip was sent on an errand to the forge, Thomas would pause in his work, pick up a piece of cooling iron, and ask, "What do you see in this, boy? What does the fire tell you of its temper?" Pip, hesitant at first, would describe the colors he saw, the way the grain of the metal felt to his intuitive sense, the subtle signs of strength or weakness that only he seemed to perceive. Thomas would listen intently, nodding slowly, sometimes grunting in agreement, sometimes asking a sharp, probing question that forced Pip to articulate his strange, fire-born knowledge. He never praised Pip directly, but there was a new respect in his gaze, a recognition of the boy's uncanny gift. Will and Hal, the apprentices, watched these exchanges with a mixture of lingering disbelief and grudging acceptance. The fire wisp, as Sir Callan had called him, was an enigma. Sir Callan, now lauded as the hero of Blackwood's defense, was a busy man, overseeing the castle's refortification and the retraining of the garrison. He rarely had cause to enter the kitchens, but when he did, and his eye fell upon Pip, he would offer a curt nod, a flicker of recognition that set Pip apart from the other scullions. It was a small thing, but for a boy used to being invisible, it was significant. One day, several months after the siege had lifted, Master Thomas summoned Pip to the forge. It was not for an errand. The master smith sat on his stool, a thoughtful expression on his face. Will and Hal were busy at another hearth, their hammering providing a rhythmic counterpoint to the quiet intensity of the moment. "Boy," Master Thomas began, his voice gruff. "You have a feel for the fire. A dangerous thing, if untutored. But a gift, nonetheless. A rare one." He paused, rubbing his scarred arm. "I am not as young as I was. And the siege. It took its toll." He looked directly at Pip. Would you consider learning the craft, properly, I mean? As an apprentice?" Pip stared at him, speechless. An apprentice blacksmith, him, a spit boy, it was an elevation he had never dared to dream of. To leave the suffocating heat of the kitchen hearth for the creative, transformative fire of the forge, to learn the secrets of shaping metal, of giving it strength and purpose. Fear warred with a sudden, dizzying hope. He was small, underfed. The work of a smith was brutally hard, demanding strength he was not sure he possessed. But the fire called to him. I do not know, master," Pip stammered. "I am just a spit boy." "You are more than that," Thomas said, his gaze unwavering. "You have the fire sight. I can teach you the hammer skill. The rest the fire itself will teach you, if you are willing to listen." He gestured towards the glowing heart of the forge. "It is a hard life, boy. Full of heat and toil and the risk of burns that make your kitchen scorches look like flea bites. But it is an honest life. A life of making, of creating. What say you?" Pip looked at the dancing flames, saw the shifting colors he understood so well. He thought of the endless, mindless turning of the spit, the greasy stench, the constant, wearying heat that offered no creation, only consumption. Then he looked at the forge, at the tools of the smith's trade, at the promise of shaping raw iron into things of strength and beauty. A slow smile, the first genuine smile he had allowed himself in a long time, spread across his soot-stained face. "Yes, master," he said, his voice barely a whisper, but firm with a newfound resolve. "Yes, I would learn." And so, Pip, the little spit boy, the fire wisp of Blackwood Keep, traded the oppressive heat of the kitchen hearth for the creative inferno of the smithy. His journey would be long and arduous. He would suffer burns, endure back-breaking labor, and struggle to master the demanding skills of the craft. But he would no longer be just a forgotten cog, turning endlessly in the shadows. He would be an apprentice, a learner, a shaper of metal, guided by the tutelage of a wise master and the secret language of the fire itself. The embers of his strange gift, once hidden, had been fanned into a flame, and its light, however small, promised to illuminate a new and unexpected path. The fire had spoken, and Pip, at last, was truly ready to answer its call. Pip's apprenticeship was as grueling as Master Thomas had promised. The forge was a demanding mistress, its heat more intense, more focused, than the diffuse inferno of the kitchen hearth. His muscles, accustomed only to the repetitive strain of turning the spit, ached constantly from pumping the heavy bellows, from swinging hammers that felt impossibly heavy, from hauling coal and quenching water. His hands, already calloused, became a latticework of new burns, blisters, and ingrained soot that no amount of scrubbing could remove. Will and Hal, the older apprentices, initially treated him with a mixture of disdain and grudging curiosity. He was still the fire wisp, the scullion who had stumbled into their world through some fluke of intuition. They often assigned him the dirtiest, most thankless tasks, cleaning out the forge, sifting cinders, polishing finished metalwork until his arms burned. But Pip endured it all with a quiet determination that slowly began to earn their reluctant respect. What he lacked in brute strength, he made up for with his uncanny connection to the fire and the metal. Master Thomas, patient and observant, guided him, teaching him the names of the tools, the properties of different types of iron and steel, the ancient techniques passed down through generations of smiths. But it was in the crucible of the fire itself that Pip truly learned. He learned to read the flames not just by their color, but by their sound, their smell, the way they danced and licked at the metal. He learned to anticipate how a piece of iron would react to the hammer, where its hidden stresses lay, how to coax it into the desired shape without weakening its spirit. His small size, initially a disadvantage, sometimes allowed him a delicacy of touch, a precision in handling smaller pieces, that eluded the more heavy-handed apprentices. "You feel the metal, boy," Master Thomas would grunt, watching Pip carefully heat a delicate hinge. "You do not just look at it. That is good. The iron knows when a hand respects it." The kitchen staff, particularly Cook Agnes, watched his transformation with a sort of bewildered pride. He was no longer the cowering spit boy. He was Pip, the smith's apprentice, his clothes perpetually stained with soot and grime, but his eyes bright with a new purpose. A focused intensity that had been absent before. He still returned to the kitchens for his meager meals, but he no longer belonged to that world of greasy steam and roasting meat. His world was now one of fire and iron, of creation and transformation. He learned to forge nails, simple and utilitarian, yet each one a small lesson in control and precision. He moved on to horseshoes, learning the crucial art of shaping them to fit a hoof perfectly, of tempering them to withstand the punishing wear of the road. He mended tools, reforged broken links of chain, and slowly, painstakingly, began to master the intricate dance of hammer and heat. There were failures, of course. Pieces that cracked in the quenching, tools that bent or broke under his inexpert hand. Each failure was a harsh lesson, often accompanied by a sharp word from Master Thomas or the derision of Will and Hal. But Pip learned from each mistake, his understanding of the metal deepening with every setback. The memory of the siege, of the crucial role he had played, faded into the background of his daily toil, but it never entirely disappeared. It was a quiet reminder of the potential that lay within him, of the strange gift that had set him on this unexpected path. Sir Callan, when he encountered Pip, would still offer a gruff "well met." Fire Wisp, a nickname that now held a note of affection rather than just surprise. Years passed. Pip grew, not tall, but wiry and strong, his muscles forged in the heat and labor of the smithy as surely as the iron he worked. His hands became those of a true craftsman, broad and capable, crisscrossed with the pale lines of old burns, the skin toughened like well-worked leather. He was no longer Pip, the boy. He was Pip, the smith, his skill and intuition earning him a solid place in Blackwood Keep. Will and Hal eventually completed their apprenticeships and moved on, seeking their fortunes as journeyman smiths in other towns and castles. Pip remained with Master Thomas, his loyalty to the old smith, the man who had seen his potential and given him a chance, unwavering. He became Thomas's right hand. his skill in tempering delicate blades and forging complex tools eventually surpassing that of his former fellow apprentices. Master Thomas, his own strength waning with age, came to rely on Pip more and more. There was a deep, unspoken bond between the old master and his unusual apprentice, a shared understanding forged in the heat of the fire, in the language of hammer and steel. One day, Master Thomas, his breath shallow, his eyes clouded with age, called Pip to his side. He pressed a heavy, intricately wrought hammer into Pip's hand, the master hammer, the symbol of his craft. "It is yours now, Pip," he whispered. "You are the smith of Blackwood. Wield it well. And always listen to the fire." A few days later, Master Thomas passed away peacefully in his sleep. Pip, his heart heavy with grief, became the new master smith of Blackwood Keep. He was still young, but his skill was undeniable. His reputation, particularly for his fine temper work, already beginning to spread beyond the castle walls. He stood before the forge, the master hammer feeling solid and true in his grip. He was no longer the soot-stained spit boy, cowering by the kitchen hearth. He was a craftsman, a creator, a man who understood the ancient, elemental secrets of fire and metal. The flames danced before him. A familiar, welcoming presence. The fire had spoken to him, and he had answered its call. And now, its power, its transformative magic, was his to command. Pip, the fire wisp, had found his destiny in the heart of the inferno. His journey was far from over, but he faced it with the quiet confidence of a man who knew his craft, and knew himself. As master smith of Blackwood Keep, Pip's life took on a new rhythm, a new weight of responsibility. He was no longer just shaping metal. He was ensuring the safety and functionality of the entire castle. From the hinges on the great gates to the arrowheads for the garrison, from the plowshares for the tenant farmers to the delicate filigree work for the ladies' chambers, his skill was in constant demand. He took on his own apprentices, young lads from the village or from the lower ranks of the castle servants, much as he himself had started. He was a patient teacher, remembering Master Thomas's gruff kindness, but also a demanding one, insisting on precision, on respect for the craft, and above all, on listening to the fire. He would often tell them tales of his own unlikely journey, of the spit boy who learned to read the flames, a story that filled them with a mixture of awe and a determination to prove their own worth. His reputation for fine tempering grew. Knights and lords from neighboring estates would sometimes send their blades to Blackwood Keep, seeking Pip's touch to restore a damaged edge or to give a new sword its perfect balance and resilience. He worked these fine steels with a reverence, a deep understanding of their inherent spirit, coaxing out their strength and beauty with a skill that seemed almost magical to those who watched. But Pip knew it was not magic, but a profound, intuitive connection to the elemental forces he commanded. He never forgot his origins. He would sometimes visit the great kitchen, the scent of roasting meat and greasy steam now a nostalgic reminder of his past rather than an oppressive reality. Cook Agnes, now old and stooped but her tongue as sharp as ever, would eye him with a grudging pride. "So, the fire wisp still remembers where the real heat is, eh?" She would cackle, though she always made sure he received a prime cut if he stayed for a meal. He made sure the kitchen spits were always in perfect repair, their iron sound and true. He forged new hooks and trivets for Cook Agnes, stronger and more artfully made than any she had possessed before. It was his small way of acknowledging the world that had, however harshly, shaped him. Blackwood Keep saw its share of troubles over the years, minor border disputes, failed harvests, outbreaks of sickness. Through it all, Pip's forge remained a constant, a place of industry and resilience. When a vital part of the mill mechanism broke, threatening the grinding of flour for the entire estate, it was Pip who worked through the night, his hammer ringing out a defiant rhythm against the looming threat of hunger, to forge a replacement stronger than the original. When a fire swept through a section of the stables, and the iron fittings of the doors warped and jammed, trapping valuable horses, it was Pip, his face grimed with soot, his eyes reflecting the desperate flames, who knew how to cool the tortured metal just so, allowing the doors to be forced open and the animals saved. He became more than just a smith, he became a quiet pillar of the Blackwood community. His advice was sought not only on matters of metalwork, but sometimes on other, more practical concerns. He was known for his honesty, his fairness, and his deep, almost preternatural understanding of how things worked, how they held together, and how they could be mended. He never married, never had children of his own. The forge was his mistress, the fire his constant companion, his apprentices his legacy. He found his contentment in the shaping of useful, beautiful things, in the transformation of raw, unyielding iron into objects of strength and purpose. Years turned into decades. Pip's once wiry frame grew stockier, his hair, once the color of soot, now streaked with gray like ash. His hands, gnarled and scarred, were a testament to a lifetime of labor, yet they still possessed an uncanny sensitivity, an ability to read the secrets of the metal with a touch. He often thought of that first siege, of the terror and the desperation, of the moment he had found his voice. It had been a crucible, forging him as surely as he now forged steel. He understood now what Master Thomas had meant, the fire did speak, and its language was one of transformation, of resilience, of the enduring power of creation in the face of destruction. One late autumn evening, as a fierce wind howled around the battlements of Blackwood Keep, rattling the shutters of the forge, Pip stood before his hearth, the master hammer resting on the anvil beside him. He was old now, his body weary, but his eyes, as they gazed into the glowing embers, were still bright with the fire's sight. An apprentice, a young lad named Finn with a shock of red hair and an earnest, eager face, was carefully banking the coals for the night. "Will the wind bring down the old oak by the river, Master Pip?" Finn asked, his voice tinged with the youthful awe he still held for the old smith. Pip smiled, a slow, thoughtful expression. "The oak is strong, Finn. It has weathered many storms. Like good iron, it knows how to bend without breaking." He picked up a piece of finely tempered steel, a dagger he had been finishing, its surface gleaming with a subtle, watery pattern. "The strength is not in unyielding hardness, boy. It is in the balance. In the proper temper. In knowing when to yield, and when to hold firm." He looked at the dancing flames, then at the eager face of his apprentice. He saw himself, so many years ago, a small, frightened boy, finding his destiny in the heart of the fire. He had listened. He had learned. And he had, in his own quiet way, kept the fires of Blackwood Keep burning bright. "Remember that, Finn," he said, his voice a low rumble, like the sound of bellows breathing life into a slumbering forge. "Always listen to the fire. It has much to teach us, if we have the wisdom to hear it." And as the wind howled outside, carrying the scent of rain and the promise of winter, Pip, the master smith of Blackwood Keep, the fire wisp who had once turned spits in the kitchen, felt a deep and abiding peace. His life had been forged in heat and toil. But it had been a life of purpose, a life of creation. And the fire, his oldest, truest friend, still burned brightly within him. The great oak by the river did not fall that winter, nor the next. Blackwood Keep, too, endured, its stones a testament to the resilience Pip so admired. He continued to work his forge, though his movements were slower, his great strength tempered now by the wisdom of age. Finn, his apprentice, grew into a capable young smith under Pip's tutelage. His youthful enthusiasm a counterpoint to Pip's quiet gravitas. Pip became a figure of legend within the keep, not for heroic deeds in battle, but for the enduring quality of his work, the almost magical way he could breathe life and strength into inert metal. Mothers would bring their children to watch him at the forge, whispering tales of the fire-wisp smith who could read the flames and understand the language of steel. He always had a kind word for the children, a small, twisted piece of iron, a tiny horse, a simple flower, for them to marvel at. He saw generations of lords and ladies pass through Blackwood's halls. He forged christening cups for their babes, intricate locks for their treasure chests, and, inevitably, fine, strong coffin fittings for their final rest. He shod the war-horses of knights who rode off to distant, forgotten battles, and the gentle palfreys of ladies who embroidered tapestries in sunlit solars. Through it all, his forge remained a constant, its rhythmic clang a familiar heartbeat within the castle walls. The world outside changed in ways that Pip, in his focused world of fire and metal, only dimly perceived. New philosophies, new ways of warfare, new modes of trade, all lapped at the edges of Blackwood's traditional existence. But the need for good iron, for strong tools, for well-tempered steel, that remained. One day, a traveling scholar, a man with spectacles perched on his nose and an insatiable curiosity about ancient crafts, arrived at Blackwood Keep. He had heard tales of the remarkable smith of Blackwood and sought Pip out. He spent days in the forge, observing Pip at work, asking endless questions, scribbling furiously in a leather-bound notebook. Master Smith, the scholar said, his eyes wide with fascination as Pip drew a perfectly tempered sword blade from the quenching oil, its surface shimmering with an almost liquid light. Your skill is. It is beyond anything I have witnessed. They say you can see into the very soul of the metal. Pip merely smiled, wiping the sweat from his brow with a soot-stained forearm. The metal has no soul, learned sir. Only a nature. A spirit, perhaps, that the fire can awaken. I only try to listen to what it wants to become. The scholar wrote this down, as if it were a profound mystical utterance. To Pip, it was simple truth, learned through a lifetime of communion with his craft. He taught Finn everything he knew, not just the techniques of the hammer and the anvil, but the deeper, intuitive understanding of the fire, the respect for the metal, the patience and precision the craft demanded. He saw in Finn a spark of the true fire sight, a willingness to listen, and he knew the forge of Blackwood would be in good hands when he was gone. The day came, as it must to all, when Pip felt his own internal fire beginning to dim. He was very old, his body worn from decades of unceasing labor. He still went to the forge each morning, the familiar heat a comfort, but his hands, though still immensely strong, trembled slightly as he gripped the hammer. He called Finn to him one evening, as the embers glowed softly in the hearth. The forge is yours now, Finn, he said, his voice a low rumble. You have learned well. You have the sight, and the skill. Guard it. Respect it. And never forget to listen to what the fire tells you. He pressed the old master hammer, the one Master Thomas had given him so many years ago, into Finn's strong young hands. This has served Blackwood well. May it continue to do so in your keeping. Finn, his eyes suspiciously bright, could only nod, his throat too tight for words. Pip lived out his final days in a small room adjoining the forge, the rhythmic clang of Finn's hammer a soothing lullaby. He would sit by his window, watching the dance of sparks, the glow of heated metal, a quiet contentment on his weathered face. He had lived a life of purpose, a life of creation. He had transformed raw, unyielding iron into things of strength and beauty. He had served Blackwood Keep faithfully. His skill a bulwark against decay and destruction. When he passed, it was peacefully, in his sleep, the scent of the forge still clinging to him like a familiar embrace. The entire keep mourned him, from the lord in his great hall to the lowliest scullion in the kitchens. They remembered Pip, the fire-wisp, the master smith, the boy who had risen from the ashes of the spit fire to command the creative heart of the castle. Finn, now Master Finn, forged a simple iron cross to mark Pip's grave in the small cemetery, not far from where Master Thomas lay. He tempered it with all the skill Pip had taught him, imbuing it with a quiet strength, a resilient spirit that mirrored the man it honored. And the forge of Blackwood Keep continued to burn. The clang of the hammer, the roar of the bellows, the hiss of hot metal meeting water, these sounds echoed through the centuries. A testament to the enduring power of the craft, and to the legacy of the extraordinary smiths who had tended its fires. Pip's story became woven into the very fabric of Blackwood's history, a tale told and retold, a legend of a humble boy with a rare gift, who listened to the fire and, in doing so, shaped not only metal, but the destiny of a castle. The fire had spoken, and its words, through Pip's hands, had become an enduring song of strength, resilience, and the transformative magic of a well-lived, purposeful life. Generations later, when Blackwood Keep was more a place of historical reverence than of urgent defense, the legend of Pip the Fire Wisp still flickered in the local lore. The old forge, though perhaps modernized in subtle ways, was still a working heart of the community that had grown around the castle. The master smith of that later era, a descendant in craft if not in blood, would still sometimes speak of the almost mythical skill of the early smiths, particularly one named Pip who was said to have a magical communion with fire and metal. The tools Pip had used, or those attributed to him, the old master hammer, a pair of unusually well-balanced tongs, a set of delicate chasing tools, were preserved. Displayed with honor in a small alcove of the forge, a shrine to the foundations of their craft. Apprentices were still told his story, how a mere spit boy, through observation and an uncanny intuition, had saved the castle during a desperate siege. Not with a sword, but with his understanding of how to make a sword, or a ratchet tooth, or any piece of metal, truly strong. The tale served as more than just an interesting anecdote. It became a parable for the craftsmen of Blackwood, a reminder that true mastery came not just from learned technique, but from a deeper, almost spiritual connection to the materials and the processes. "Listen to the fire" became a common refrain, an echo of Pip's own oft-repeated wisdom. And what of the impact beyond the forge, the successful defense of Blackwood Keep, in which Pip's interventions had played a small but crucial role, had indeed altered its history. Had the inner portcullis failed, had Sir Caelan's sword not been restored, the outcome of that long-ago siege might have been very different. Lord Valerius might have triumphed. And Blackwood might have fallen under a different, perhaps harsher, rule. The ripple effects of those small, fire-lit moments in the forge had spread outwards through time, shaping the destiny of the keep and its people in ways no one could have fully predicted. The memory of the fire site also lingered. Occasionally, a young apprentice in the Blackwood forge would show a particular aptitude, an intuitive feel for the heat and the metal that went beyond normal skill. The older smiths would watch them closely, murmuring, "Perhaps this one has a touch of old Pip's gift." It fostered a culture of observation, of looking beyond the surface, of valuing intuition alongside technique. In the wider world, the grand chronicles of the realm would speak of the siege of Blackwood Keep as a footnote in the endless squabbles of feudal lords, perhaps mentioning Sir Caelan's valor or the timely arrival of the Earl of Northgate. There would be no mention of a little spit boy and his uncanny understanding of tempering. But within the walls of Blackwood, and in the surrounding villages where its influence extended, Pip's story was a living thread. It was a story of hope, of the unexpected potential that can lie dormant in the humblest of individuals. It was a story that celebrated not noble birth or martial prowess, but the quiet, essential virtues of skill, dedication, and the courage to speak a difficult truth when it mattered most. The fire that Pip had tended, both literally and metaphorically, continued to burn. It burned in the heart of the forge, in the skills passed down through generations of smiths. It burned in the spirit of Blackwood Keep itself, a spirit of resilience, of endurance, of the quiet, unearthed strength that had seen it through centuries of turmoil. And if one were to stand in the old forge on a quiet evening, when the day's work was done and the embers glowed softly in the hearth, one might almost imagine the presence of Pip himself. His small, soot-stained face illuminated by the familiar light, his eyes bright with the wisdom of the flames. One might almost hear the echo of his voice, whispering the ancient secrets of fire and steel, a timeless lesson in the art of transformation, the enduring magic of creation. The legacy of the fire wisp was not just in the metal he had shaped, but in the spirit he had ignited. The castle, in its enduring majesty, eventually transitioned from a fortress of war to a monument of peace, its battlements standing as silent witnesses to a bygone era. The great halls that once echoed with the clang of armor and the calls to arms now resonated with the hushed footfalls of visitors, eager to glimpse a past both romanticized and starkly real. The kitchens, though modernized, still held the faint, ingrained scent of centuries of wood smoke and roasting meats, a ghostly reminder of the endless toil that had once sustained its inhabitants. And the forge, Blackwood's ancient heart of fire and iron, became a celebrated part of this living history. It was maintained not just as a workshop, but as a demonstration of a venerable craft. Master smiths, inheritors of Pip's distant legacy, would still work the bellows and hammer the steel, their skills a captivating display for those who came to learn about the old ways. Among the tales they told, the story of Pip, the spit boy who became master smith and saved the keep with his fire sight, was a favorite. It was often embellished, as legends are, with each telling. Some versions had Pip wrestling demons in the flames, others had him forging swords that could cut through stone. But at the core of every version remained the essential truth: a humble boy, overlooked and underestimated, possessed an extraordinary gift that, in a moment of dire need, proved more valuable than all the might of armored knights. Schoolchildren on tours would listen, wide-eyed, imagining the small, soot-covered boy standing before the roaring furnace, guiding grown men with his uncanny wisdom. Young apprentices, learning the rudiments of blacksmithing in workshops far beyond Blackwood's walls, might hear his tale as an inspiration, a testament to the power of intuition and dedication. The scholar who had visited Pip so long ago had, indeed, published his notes, and while his monograph on the artisan smiths of the borderlands was a niche academic work, it contained a chapter dedicated to the fire wisp of Blackwood Keep. This chapter, meticulously detailing what he had observed and what local lore had recounted, ensured that Pip's story, or at least a version of it, found its way into the more formal annals of craft history. And so, the boy who had once been invisible, a mere cog in the great machine of the castle, achieved a kind of immortality. Not the immortality of kings, whose names were carved on grand tombs, but the immortality of a story well told, a legacy passed down through the work of hands and the whispers of generations. The great oak by the river, the one Pip had spoken of to young Finn, still stood, gnarled and ancient, its roots sunk deep into the Blackwood soil. It had indeed weathered many storms, a living symbol of the resilience that Pip himself had embodied. Sometimes, visitors to the keep would seek it out, having heard the legend, and stand beneath its sprawling branches, imagining the world as Pip might have seen it. The fire in the Blackwood forge, though perhaps fueled by different means now, still burned. It was a symbol of continuity, of the enduring human need to shape, to create, to transform the raw materials of the earth into objects of use and beauty. And in its dancing flames, in the rhythmic clang of the hammer on the anvil, one could still sense the spirit of Pip, the fire wisp, the master smith, the boy who had listened to the fire and, in doing so, had left an indelible mark on the heart of Blackwood Keep. His was a quiet legend, but one forged in the truest of fires, and it warmed all who came to know it. The essence of his contribution was not just in the objects he made, but in the example he set, that even the smallest spark of talent, if nurtured and respected, could illuminate the world. 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 And respected,